Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon user today. I have spent the long weekend. At time of recording, it is Wednesday, and that means that the Pathfinder playtest has been out for almost a week now. I picked up my copy over the weekend, and then I spent most of the weekend actually going through it. And since then, I've gone onto the Paizo message boards. I've seen some other videos on YouTube about what people's reactions have been to it. And it's I had some thoughts about it that I just wanted to quickly throw out there and see what other folks are thinking. So I guess, like, if you're not familiar with the playtest, and I mean, why would you watch this video if you're not, I guess? But Pathfinder, the Pathfinder role-playing game, which is a kind of a D&D third edition derived role-playing game published by Paizo quite successfully for the last about 10 years. They have just released free copies online, and then you can purchase in print the playtest document that they're going to be using, or the community is going to be using for the next year to playtest the system and provide feedback. And then to next August, they will be releasing, so August 2019, they'll be releasing a second edition of their role-playing game. My understanding is that the reason this is necessary is partly because of feeling that Pathfinder First Edition has kind of run its course, in the sense that they've said everything they need to say in terms of core rule books for it, and that they've lost an awful lot of market share to 5th Edition D&D. So it was sort of a necessity, is what I understand. Now that itself is a contentious, at least as far as the Paizo message boards are concerned, it's a fairly contentious statement, but that's what my understanding is in any event. So the way I have been looking at this, I've had a recent, kind of on the road to Tarsus moment with Pathfinder, where I've come back to Pathfinder after a number of years, and I've really found a lot to like there. More recently, because of some changes in our gaming group, I've been leaning more towards running OSR games, which are a lot easier to improv and a lot easier to pick up and run. But it doesn't change the fact that I really do like a lot of things about the Pathfinder system. However, I'm not invested, as it's not, quote, my system, end quote. It's not the system that I use to run everything. It's just one of many games that I enjoy, and there's elements I steal from it that I'll use in other games, and so forth. So when I picked up the second edition, I was looking at it really strictly from, all right, okay, what is this? What's this game going to be? I wasn't looking for, okay, I'm carrying on from my relationship, committed relationship with Pathfinder onto another thing. So I'm viewing this strictly as, this is another D&D based game that may have some good ideas I can steal, and that might be fun to play at the table. So that's the perspective from which I'm looking at this. Some of the overall impression I get from this particular game as well is that it seems to take a lot of design cues from 4th edition D&D, and that is sort of a no-no thing to describe this as far as the Pathfinder community is, because Pathfinder largely was created as a reaction to 4th edition D&D. People who wanted to keep playing an earlier edition of D&D, but did not, but didn't want to go on to, didn't want to keep on with their own stuff. Pathfinder was its own creation, a 3.75 version of D&D, if you will. So, yeah, so I played an awful lot of 4th edition. Like, I really enjoyed it back in the day. And we recently, in the last year, late last year, I suppose, we tried to go back to it, and that was unsuccessful. The game really shows its age, and I think we're also in a different headspace than what we were in before in terms of what we want out of a role-playing game. And I have also purchased, and I haven't run a lot of, I've only run a handful of sessions of Starfinder, but Starfinder, honestly, like, it adopts a lot of the same sensibilities from 4th edition. Those specific sensibilities that I'm talking about are the idea that you will be measuring the difficulty of the fictional world that the players encounter based on where they are in the leveling scheme. So a lot of the weapons that they will encounter and be able to pick up and they'll be able to use and purchase and stuff like that will be keyed sort of to their level range, as will the adversaries they'll be facing, as well the difficulties of a lot of the challenges, like the skill-related challenges that they'll be doing. And that is something that they teased in Pathfinder, in the Pathfinder Unchained book, but this completely adopts that. It has the idea that you're adding your level as a modifier to all things you're doing. So, you know, your attacks, your skills, your saving throws, all of those things, your armor class, all of those things incorporate your level, meaning that if you are punching above your weight, or at least too far above your weight, or too low beyond your weight, it's going to really shatter the quote unquote simulationist or reality, I guess, end quote, about the game. You know, objectively, a first level character is impossible. You know, it's not possible for them to really hit a 10th level adversary or to seek a 10th level challenge. So what that means is there's by necessity going to be some kind of interaction with the world, or some kind of conceits where games are going to, you know, gamifying and game mechanics are going to trump the objective reality of the world. That's a dramatic departure from Pathfinder, where, you know, as you went up in power level, either hit dice for monsters or for your character level, you were, you know, you were going to be escalating. And I still don't know how I feel about that, because it's obviously an intentional design decision to go away from the bounded accuracy that 5th edition did, and that a lot of older editions sort of had, where it was easier to get long-term use out of a lot of more powerful monsters. But that's what it is. I mean, that's a design decision. And one of the things that I have found about running Starfinder lately is that, you know, if that's the reality of the world, really, you know, thinking about it in the abstract in terms of like, well, this is what the whole world consists of, and it's stupid that my first level character could never affect a 10th level thing, or blah, 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 and it's stupid that the world continually rises to the challenges of me. If you think of it in that way, I agree, like that's going to break your immersion in the game. However, if you just think of it in terms of like, you know, and I hate to use a video game, but I mean like a video game or a movie or something, whatever is on the screen or whatever is on at the table, that's the stuff that matters. And how it relates to your characters, that's what matters. It's a game that isn't like OSR games where there's an objective world where you go out and do, you know, interact with it and do, you know, it doesn't care whether you succeed or fail or whatnot. It is what it is, what it is, and your characters just interact with it. These kinds of games are very much about making your characters heroes. They are heroes in a you know, in an epic story, and it really, this edition more so than the previous edition, really leans into that. And if that's the case, well, then it only matters how it relates to your characters. So it seems like there's a different core assumption about your character's relationship with the world in this game versus the earlier one, and I'm totally okay with that. Like it's just a different game. So setting those aside, that's the assumption. So if that's the game we're playing, how does this actually apply then? And they're basically, the way that the game or the playtest seems to be structured is by giving a preponderance of toys to mix and match as you make your characters. You know, there are different ways you can, this is not the same thing as Pathfinder, where you make a lot of different mathematical decisions in terms of building your character, like ways to optimize their skill with a certain, you know, their ability with a certain skill, or their ability with a certain weapon, or things like that. This seems to intentionally let the math be baked into the game, and then it allows you to make some relatively minor math choices, but otherwise choices that let you do things that you could not otherwise do. So it gives you, by an example of that, I mean like your wizard can use their magic in a certain way that other wizards maybe cannot. If they haven't made the same selections, they can't do that. Or your dwarf has certain abilities that other dwarves don't necessarily have because they haven't chosen those abilities. And that cuts across basically the full spectrum of different characters. The three axes on which you're making your character are your ancestry, which was called race in previous editions. So your ancestry, your background, and your class. And in each of those three elements, you get to make some really interesting decisions as far as what you can do. And there's a bunch of other things that they've done too that are interesting callbacks to older editions, like where they've clearly made a difference between combat encounters and exploration encounters. So that's things like in older editions where, you know, you would have a move rate that was measured in by your turn, which was 10 minutes, versus your movement rate per round, which was 10 seconds, or a minute in the case of AD&D. And that's it. That's an interesting decision, and it's another step towards 4th edition, I think, where they're codifying the different phases of gameplay. But I don't get the sense, having spent many years playing 4th edition, I don't get the sense that this is really, it's not to the same degree of regimented, watertight compartments that you that you had in previous editions, or in a 4th edition, where like you were, if you were in combat, you were in combat. There was not, you weren't in a skill challenge, you weren't traveling over land, you were in combat, and that's what the different set of rules that you interacted with. That's not quite the same here. There feels like there's a little more loosey-goosiness to it. I should say I haven't brought it to the table yet, so I don't know how it's actually going to play, but I am really intrigued to see how it will play. The playtest results I've read so far have said it's really deadly, but which is interesting because you start at first level with like at least double the hit points that you would in Pathfinder 1st edition. And I think the main reason for that is because they have adopted criticals as being sort of it's either if you roll a nat 20 or if you beat the target number you're looking for by 10. And I've heard that there's one encounter in particular in the playtest campaign, which is this sucker right here, Doomsday Dawn. I actually forgot to pick my copy up on last week on Thursday. But yeah, so there are, I guess, I'm okay. Like, things being deadly at first level is something I'm completely fine with in every other edition, and if it means that combat at first level is really swingy, well, that's what things were like in every previous edition too. The decision to make criticals not have to go through the confirmation process that they did in 1st edition is, I think, an intentional design decision to make the combat a lot more deadly and a lot less predictable. And that means that you probably are going to have to be really cautious with, you have to apply tactics, which in theory, I guess, this new action economy with having 3 actions each turn that you can mix and match, that will really encourage that style of play. And I'm interested in seeing whether that's the case, whether you can have a character that has the sort of like depth of powers, that 4th edition characters seem to have. Not to the degree that 4th edition D&D characters had, but it's a very similar feel to it, I think. Like looking at the fighter's abilities, a fighter seems in this edition a lot more complex than what they were in previous editions. In Pathfinder 3.5 3rd edition, there's a lot more kind of like unique abilities you've got that seem very, very much like powers from 4th edition, which I take as a good thing because it means it gives you more tactics. But by also decoupling the tactics like knocking down, or like what was bull rushing is now called shoving. So shoving and grappling and disarming and stuff like that, those are all key to skills now and don't carry with them the massive penalties that those kind of maneuvers took in previous editions. I think what it means is that it opens, and keeping the relative scale between people who are skilled in things and not skilled in things at a relatively small band, which is probably going to be, between 1 and 6, I think, is around probably what the modifiers are, maybe 7, 8, without magical gear. What that means is that everybody can adopt those as viable tactics, without having to go down a feat tree to get it. So I wonder whether it's going to mean for more inventive play or support more inventive play and not de-incentivize certain tactics like, knocking somebody down or smashing them in the face or whatever. So what I will say too is that I really should do an actual proper review of it at some point, I suppose, and maybe I'll save the particulars of the book for that, and just save these as sort of opening impressions. But the thing I will say about the rule book is, I sat all weekend paging through this and trying to piece together what the new game is, because it is very much a new game. It's not a specifically organic growth of like, oh, I recognize that and now it works a little bit differently. This is not a jump from 1st edition AD&D to 2nd edition AD&D. This is 2nd to 3rd, or even maybe 2nd to 4th, where it's a totally different game. And And I like that. I mean, like for me, again, not being super invested in Pathfinder as my game, it's interesting to see where, what neat ideas they've got in here. Um, so yeah, so I mean, I think that the fact that I spent so much time going through every single page and every single class and finding interesting things in the different classes, like for instance, how the variety of druids you can play, the variety of um, mages, or the variety of sorcerers is bonkers in this. Now, I'm not going to again go into super detail because I'm going to assume either you've had a chance to grab the book yourself, or I think maybe this will prompt you to go and download the free books because it's you cost you nothing but your time, and there's nothing. Even if you are a player in like an old school game or in modern Pathfinder or whatever, or fifth edition, there's some really interesting ideas in this game, like keen sorcerers to different spell lists. Sorcerers, depending on your bloodline, now maybe divine casters or maybe occult casters, which is a brand new type of magic, different from arcane. And it's occult is sort of like forgotten ancient lore of magic versus the regimented stuff you can learn in an academy. And there's primal now too, primal spells, which is again a callback to fourth edition, where they take different power, power sources. So overall, this to me seems like if there was a second edition of fourth edition, so there's a 4.5 D&D where it understood that that game really was a board game that you could also play as a role-playing game, and decided to key it back to more of the sensibilities of traditional style D&D play. This might look a lot like what you got. 13th Age, the role-playing game published by Pelgrane Press, I think. That's another one that was an outgrowth from fourth edition, took fourth edition as a starting point and then went from there. This seems to sort of be like that as well too, and I'm okay with that because I really did like a lot of stuff about fourth edition. Anyway, I've been talking long enough with this, so maybe this is just a bunch of rambling about it, but that's my thoughts on the book. I'm really intrigued by what's in here. It has by no means jumped to being the first game I want to run, and I really don't want to run the playtest stuff because I don't know. I don't want to have to play through specific things. But looking at it as a kludger or someone who's going to DIY and grab stuff from this, taking this thing and then running a sandbox style game where I'm going to rework the XP system, adopt sort of a magic, random magic stuff, random encounters, and implement a morale and reaction system so it plays like old school D&D. That might be an awful lot of fun. And because the last couple of editions of D&D, the first thing I've gone to is try to play something in the World of Warcraft world. I'm thinking a lot about using this to run a sandbox for Northrend, set at the time of Wrath of the Lich King, if you're familiar with the World of Warcraft setting. And the sort of video gamey elements of D&D 4th edition that I see in this make me think that it would be a pretty natural fit for it. But anyway, yeah. So I am very interested to see how this plays at the table because there are other games I've talked about on the channel before, like Savage Worlds, where they read very differently than they played. They didn't read particularly well, and it didn't seem super interesting to me. But as soon as I got it to the table, it was a revelation. And Blades in the Dark actually was like that too. Blades in the Dark was a game that didn't read really great for me, but as soon as I got it to the table, I was like, oh shit, this is the game. This is great. So I'm looking at this as a new game, not as just a next iteration of Pathfinder, and looking at this as something that I can kludge to be what I want. I'm pretty excited about this game. So if you have any comments, questions, or concerns about second edition, or your own experiences with it too, like what your thoughts have been, how you're seeing it, I'd be interested in hearing about that because it's an exciting new thing right now, and I'm in particular, people have used this for any mid-level, high-level play or do. I'd be interested in hearing what your experiences were like with that, because magic items in this is a massive change from previous editions where each bonus to your weapons now gives you additional dice in addition to the plus. And that's a really fucking cool idea, if only because it makes magic items seem really, really badass and makes a really a big difference between just mastercraft weapon or something that's got a natural bonus versus something that is a powerful enchanted object, you know. So I don't know how game breaking that's going to be in terms of balance, but I also don't know if I care that much. You know, Pathfinder really is it's a terrifically durable system, the first edition, where you really have to, you can kick the tires, you can, as long as you're playing by the rules, you don't have to worry about balance stuff for the most part. But OSR games don't give a shit about that stuff. So if I run this in that style, who gives a shit if I give players at early levels magic items? Because if it, I'm not concerned about those balance issues. I'm concerned about them, finding badass loot and getting excited about that stuff. And that is absolutely something that I thought of when I read this. I love that there's different tiers of stabs and other kinds of magic items that you can get into the game very early. And that's something that was very cool about Fourth. The magic item element of the game was a lot of fun for players, and it was a really engaging part of character design and theory crafting. And I think that if there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, but if you're able to implement that in this game, a game where the setting is not low fantasy, it's not dark fantasy, it's not low magic, it is something where there is going to be progressively more powerful magic items you're going to be encountering. Well, why the fuck not introduce that stuff early, and give players lesser versions of a fire staff or lesser versions of a healing staff or whatever, or the other kinds of utility magic items. So I'm going to keep talking about this because I've been thinking about this all weekend. So maybe I'll cut this off here. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding this, or you want to share some of your own reactions from this, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below. Shoot me a tweet at Dungeon Musings, or shoot me an email at dungeonmusings@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks very much for listening to my rambling thoughts on this new playtest. I'm sure I'm going to be following up with something probably in the range of a proper review, or at least an overview of what's in there, but there are pretty good videos out about that already, so maybe it's not necessary for me to just be yet another voice saying that. I'll see if I can think of something more constructive to add to the conversation here. But anyway, thanks very much for listening, folks. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to drop me a line. If not, I will see you again later tonight for some actual play with my usual group. So thanks, folks. See you soon.